The Spanish Inquisition gets painted as religious persecution, torture chambers, burning heretics, but there's a darker layer most people never hear about: the sexual obsessions that drove interrogations, the perverted punishments designed to humiliate, the twisted ways inquisitors weaponized shame and desire against their victims. Between 1492 and 1834, the Holy Office didn't just hunt heretics, they became fixated on sexual sins, turning bedrooms into crime scenes and intimacy into evidence. What happened when religious zealots gained absolute power over people's most private moments? The Spanish Inquisition officially began in 1492 under Ferdinand and Isabella. The kingdom had just expelled Jews and conquered Granada. Now they needed unity. Sexual purity became their weapon. Inquisitors received manuals detailing how to extract confessions about carnal sins, the Directorium. Inquisitorum spelled out procedures: solicitation and confession, sodomy, bigamy, bestiality. Every intimate act became potential heresy. If you value documented historical research like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from the Spanish National Historical Archive and Henry Kamen's scholarship. Now back to the story. Toledo, 1496. The case files start rolling in. Father Miguel Hernandez stands accused of solicitation during confession. The charge? Using the confessional booth to seduce female penitents. Maria Gonzalez testifies that he demanded she describe her intimate relations with her husband in explicit detail. Then he told her that sexual acts with him would absolve her sins. The tribunal records show 12 women gave similar testimony. Their statements fill 43 pages of parchment. Hernandez received life imprisonment. His name was struck from church records. Solicitation cases exploded across Spain. The Holy Office recorded over 4,000 cases between 1500 and 1800. Priests used their authority to coerce sexual favors. They claimed biblical precedent. They twisted scripture. The Inquisition created standardized questionnaires for victims. Question 15 asked about physical contact. Question 21 demanded descriptions of specific acts. The tribunals documented everything: names, dates, locations, positions. Seville, 1528. The sodomy trials begin. The Holy Office declared homosexual acts a crime against nature and God. They developed specialized torture techniques for these cases. The garrucha, victims hung by their wrists with weights attached to their feet. The toca, water torture that simulated drowning. But for sodomy cases, they added psychological torments, forced nakedness during interrogation, public humiliation. Crowds gathered to watch the accused parade through streets wearing San Benitos, yellow robes painted with flames and devils. The records show brutal efficiency. In Zaragoza alone, between 1570 and 1590, inquisitors tried 137 men for sodomy. 42 burned alive, 63 received life sentences, 32 died under torture. The youngest victim was 14 years old. His name was Pedro Martin. The tribunal accused him of relations with an older man. Under torture, he confessed to acts that likely never happened. They burned him on March 15th during 1574. His ashes were scattered in the Ebro River. Valencia developed the most systematic approach to sexual crimes. The tribunal there created detailed categories: natural sins versus unnatural sins, completed acts versus attempted acts, public scandals versus private transgressions. Each category carried different punishments. The inquisitors measured everything: length of imprisonment, number of lashes, amount of property confiscated. They treated human sexuality like accounting. Bigamy cases revealed the Inquisition's obsession with marriage as sacrament. Miguel de Cervantes, yes, the author, faced investigation in 1570 for alleged bigamy. His first wife had disappeared. When he remarried, neighbors reported him. The Holy Office spent 3 years investigating his sexual history. They questioned former lovers. They examined marriage records across 3 provinces. They found no evidence of actual bigamy, but the investigation destroyed his reputation. The trial records mention intimate details about his relationships that had nothing to do with the charges. The Casa de Penitencia in Seville housed women convicted of sexual crimes. These weren't prisons. They were reform institutions designed to break female sexuality. Inmates wore rough brown habits. They ate once daily. They prayed 16 hours each day. The rules forbade looking at men, speaking to men, or even thinking about men. Guards monitored their menstrual cycles to ensure they weren't pregnant from illicit relations. Women who broke celibacy rules received additional sentences. Some spent decades inside. Torture sessions. For sexual crimes, followed specific protocols. The Inquisition's torture manual, the Repertorium Inquisitorum, dedicated entire chapters to extracting sexual confessions. Victims faced the potro, a rack that dislocated joints, the cordials, cords that cut into flesh, the garrucha, suspension torture. But for sexual crimes, inquisitors added psychological elements. They forced victims to describe acts in explicit detail. They demanded names of partners. They created sexual shame as a torture method. The tribunals kept meticulous records of these sessions. In Barcelona, the case of Ana Rodriguez shows the pattern. Accused of adultery in 1634, she endured 4 torture sessions. The transcripts record her screams, her pleas, her eventual confession to acts she may never have committed. The inquisitors wrote down everything: duration of torture, number of turns of the rack, exact words spoken. Ana died in prison before her trial ended. Her confession filled 27 pages. Blasphemy cases often centered on sexual language. The Holy Office prosecuted people for using religious terms during intimate moments. In Madrid, 1645, carpenter Juan Lopez faced trial for shouting "Jesus" during climax. His wife testified against him. The tribunal considered this mixing the sacred with the profane, a form of heresy. Lopez received 200 lashes and 5 years exile. The court record notes he lost consciousness after 130 lashes. The Inquisition created an entire vocabulary around sexual sins: solicitación, sodomía, bestialidad, malicia. Each term carried precise legal definitions. Each definition determined punishment severity. The Holy Office published lists of forbidden acts. These lists circulated in churches. People learned to fear their own desires. Self-censorship became survival. Auto de fe ceremonies turned sexual punishment into public spectacle. Condemned prisoners wore San Benitos displaying their crimes. Sexual offenders got special treatment. Their robes showed detailed paintings of their alleged sins. Crowds gathered to see the shameful displays. In Cordoba, 1667, the auto de fe featured 12 sexual criminals. Their procession lasted 3 hours. Vendors sold food to spectators. Children threw stones. The event became entertainment. The psychology of sexual interrogation reveals the Inquisition's true nature. They didn't just punish sexual crimes, they created them. Leading questions during torture sessions planted ideas in victims' minds. Sleep deprivation and pain made people confess to impossible acts. The transcripts show this pattern repeating across decades. Innocent people confessing to elaborate sexual fantasies that existed only in their torturers' imaginations. Conversos, Jewish converts to Christianity, faced particular scrutiny regarding sexual practices. The Inquisition suspected them of maintaining Jewish customs, including circumcision and ritual purity laws. These investigations required intimate physical examinations. In Valencia, 1608, the tribunal ordered examinations of 37 suspected converso men. Medical officials checked for evidence of circumcision. The procedures were invasive, humiliating, and often medically dangerous. Several men died from infections caused by the examinations. The Inquisition's treatment of clerical celibacy reveals institutional hypocrisy. While ordinary people faced torture for sexual crimes, corrupt inquisitors often escaped punishment. In Toledo, 1673, Inquisitor Don Fernando de Valdez faced accusations of keeping multiple mistresses. The investigation found evidence of abuse, spanning 12 years. Instead of facing trial, Valdez received a quiet transfer to a rural monastery. His victims received no compensation or justice. Women accused of sexual witchcraft faced the most brutal treatment. The Malleus Maleficarum influenced Spanish procedures, linking female sexuality with demonic power. Suspected witches endured genital examinations, searching for devil's marks. These marks could be any blemish, scar, or birthmark. The examinations were performed by male officials, often in front of crowds. In Salamanca, 1595, Maria de Zozea died during such an examination. The cause of death was listed as divine judgment. The economic aspect of sexual persecution reveals calculated cruelty. Property confiscation funded tribunal operations. Sexual crimes carried automatic confiscation penalties. The Holy Office seized houses, land, livestock, and cash from condemned prisoners. In Seville, the account books show that sexual crime prosecutions generated 40% of tribunal revenue between 1600 and 1700. They turned human suffering into profit. Exile punishments for sexual crimes created wandering populations of outcasts. Banned from their home regions, these people struggled to survive. They couldn't work in guilds. They couldn't own property. They couldn't marry without special permission. Some formed underground communities in border regions. Others died of starvation and exposure. The Inquisition created deliberate social destruction. The Suprema, the Inquisition's central council, standardized sexual crime procedures across Spain. They published detailed manuals explaining torture techniques, interrogation methods, and punishment scales. These manuals traveled between tribunals, spreading systematic cruelty. The documents survive in Spanish archives, filled with bureaucratic language describing human brutality. They read like administrative manuals for organized sadism. Regional variations in sexual crime prosecution reveal local obsessions. The Canary Islands tribunals focused on bestiality cases, reflecting rural society. Catalonia emphasized sodomy prosecutions, targeting suspected French influences. Galicia concentrated on clerical sexual crimes, responding to local scandals. Each region adapted the Inquisition's methods to local prejudices and fears. The decline of sexual crime prosecutions began in the 18th century. Enlightenment ideas challenged the Inquisition's authority. Bourbon reforms limited tribunal powers, but change came slowly. The last person burned for sexual crimes died in 1781 in Seville. His name was Caetano Ripoll, a schoolteacher accused of teaching deistic philosophy and sexual impropriety. The crowd that watched his execution was smaller than in previous centuries, but the fire burned just as hot. Medical records from tribunal prisons reveal the physical toll of sexual crime punishment. Chronic injuries from torture, malnutrition from restricted diets, mental breakdown from psychological abuse. The physicians who treated prisoners documented everything with clinical detachment. Their reports survive in hospital archives, providing gruesome details about the Inquisition's systematic destruction of human bodies. The Inquisition developed elaborate systems of sexual surveillance that extended far beyond the torture chambers. In Granada, 1507, they established networks of informants called familiares. These men received official licenses to spy on neighbors' intimate lives. They monitored who entered which houses at night. They listened for sounds of illicit passion. They reported suspicious bedding arrangements. The Familia of Granada filed over 3,000 reports between 1510 and 1560. Each report contained intimate details about suspected sexual transgressions. Marriage nullification cases reveal another layer of sexual control. The Holy Office could dissolve marriages they deemed spiritually invalid. In Murcia, 1621, they annulled the marriage of Diego Fernandez and Isabel Morales after neighbors reported the couple engaged in unnatural acts. The tribunal forced intimate examinations of both spouses. They questioned servants about bedroom activities. They cataloged sexual positions and frequencies. When they dissolved the marriage, both parties faced exile and property confiscation. The Inquisition's treatment of prostitution shows their selective moral outrage. While ordinary prostitutes faced imprisonment and torture, those who serviced inquisitors received protection. In Seville, the tribunal maintained an unofficial brothel for staff use. The account books list payments to women for necessary services. When citizens complained about this hypocrisy, the complaints disappeared into tribunal files. The women who tried to expose this corruption faced charges of blasphemy against holy officials. Sexual crime investigations often targeted entire communities. The village of Quintanar del Rey faced collective prosecution in 1656. Anonymous accusations claimed the entire population practiced group sexual rituals. Inquisitors arrived with armed guards and sealed the village. They interrogated every adult resident over 3 months. The transcripts show leading questions designed to create confessions of impossible orgies. 37 villagers eventually confessed to participating in elaborate sexual ceremonies that existed only in the Inquisitors' imaginations. The psychological manipulation during sexual interrogations followed documented patterns. Sleep deprivation weakened resistance. Isolation created desperation. False promises of leniency encouraged confession. In Barcelona, the case files of Catalina Ruiz show this process step by step. Accused of adultery in 1639, she initially maintained innocence. After 9 days without sleep and minimal food, she began inventing sexual encounters to satisfy her interrogators. Each confession led to demands for more explicit details. The cycle continued until she had implicated dozens of innocent people in her fabricated sexual network. Forced marriages became another tool of sexual control. The Holy Office arranged marriages between repentant sexual criminals as a form of rehabilitation. These couples had no choice in their partners. They received strict rules about approved sexual behavior within marriage. Monitors visited their homes to ensure compliance. In Valencia, 63 such forced marriages occurred between 1600 and 1650. The survival rate of these marriages was less than 20%. Most ended in further criminal charges when spouses violated the imposed sexual restrictions. The training of inquisitors included detailed instruction in sexual interrogation techniques. The Directorium Inquisitorum contained specific chapters on extracting sexual confessions. New inquisitors learned to identify physical signs of various sexual acts. They studied anatomical charts. They practiced interrogation scripts. They learned to exploit shame and fear of exposure. The training materials survive in monastery libraries, filled with clinical descriptions of human sexuality reduced to evidence categories. property confiscation from sexual crimes funded elaborate tribunal headquarters. The Palace of the Inquisition in Seville cost over 40,000 ducats to build. Much of this money came from seized assets of sexual crime victims. The building featured specialized chambers for intimate examinations. It included soundproof rooms for extracting sexual confessions. It housed extensive libraries of sexual crime precedents. The architecture itself reflected the Inquisition's obsession with controlling human sexuality through institutional power. International correspondence reveals how Spanish sexual prosecutions influenced other inquisitions. Portuguese inquisitors requested Spanish manuals on sodomy investigations. Roman officials studied Spanish methods for clerical sexual crimes. French bishops adopted Spanish techniques for prosecuting sexual witchcraft. The Spanish Inquisition became a model for sexual persecution across Catholic Europe. Their methods spread like a contagion of institutionalized sadism. The final account books from dissolved tribunals show the true scale of sexual persecution. Between 1492 and 1834, Spanish inquisitors prosecuted over 37,000 cases involving sexual crimes. They seized property worth millions of reales. They destroyed thousands of families. They turned human intimacy into a weapon of state control. Medical knowledge advanced through these sexual investigations, but at horrific human cost. Inquisition physicians developed new understanding of human anatomy through forced examinations. They documented sexual injuries caused by torture. They studied the psychological effects of sexual humiliation. Their findings influenced European medicine for centuries, but the knowledge came from systematic abuse of helpless prisoners. Children born to sexual crime victims faced lifelong persecution. The Inquisition marked these children as infected blood, regardless of circumstances. They could not hold church positions. They could not join certain guilds. They faced social exclusion and economic discrimination. In Córdoba, the registers show over 800 such children between 1550 and 1650. Their names appeared on lists that followed families for generations. The bureaucracy of sexual persecution required enormous administrative resources. Each tribunal employed scribes who specialized in sexual crime documentation. They developed standardized forms for recording intimate details. They created filing systems that categorized sexual acts by type and severity. They maintained correspondence networks that shared information about suspected sexual criminals across regions. The administrative machinery of sexual control consumed massive resources and employed hundreds of officials. Underground resistance to sexual persecution took various forms. Secret networks helped sexual crime victims escape to Portugal or France. Coded messages warned people about impending investigations. Some communities developed elaborate systems to provide false testimony that protected neighbors. In the Basque provinces, entire villages coordinated lies to shield residents from sexual crime accusations. These resistance networks saved thousands of lives, but operated at constant risk of exposure and destruction. The last tribunal closed in 1834, S3x, but its records remained sealed for over a century. When historians finally gained access in the 1960s, they found systematic documentation of institutionalized sexual sadism. The Spanish National Historical Archive contains over 200,000 documents related to Inquisition sexual prosecutions. Each file represents a human life destroyed by a religious obsession with controlling desire. Modern analysis of Inquisition bones reveals the physical toll of sexual crime punishment. Forensic examination shows evidence of systematic torture in skeletal remains. Dental studies reveal malnutrition patterns consistent with prison conditions. Pathology reports document injuries that match historical torture descriptions. The bones tell the same story as the written records: systematic, calculated destruction of human bodies in service of sexual control. In 1985, construction workers renovating a building in Toledo discovered a sealed basement room. Inside, they found torture devices, prisoner restraints, and detailed anatomical drawings used during sexual crime interrogations. The drawings showed how to identify physical evidence of specific sexual acts. They revealed the pseudo-scientific methods inquisitors used to prove sexual guilt. The discovery confirmed what historians had suspected. The Inquisition had turned sexual investigation into systematic torture science. Cold stone walls, detailed records, measured cruelty.